What if the strongest man in the room suddenly looked like the weakest? What if a global champion, a man built on power, discipline, and control, was reduced in seconds to silence, confusion, and blood-speckled glass? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. And what if the internet saw it before the truth had time to catch up? That is how this story begins. Not with a punch, not with a bell, not with a roar from a stadium crowd, but with twisted metal on a Nigerian highway, with phones shaking in strangers' hands, with a boxer sitting shirtless in a wrecked SUV, staring forward, not speaking, not posing, not performing, just breathing. For a moment, the world forgot who Anthony Joshua was, and instead, it asked a terrifying question. Is he going to make it? Because the footage didn't look like minor injuries. The silence didn't look like confidence. And the road he was on had a reputation that made even experienced drivers uneasy. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, a stretch of asphalt that has swallowed buses, families, dreams, and futures. A road Nigerians whisper about, joke about, warn their loved ones about. A road where speed feels normal until it isn't. And on this day, shortly after 11 a.m., that road met one of the most famous athletes on earth. Anthony Joshua, former heavyweight world champion, Olympic gold medalist. A man whose entire brand is built around strength and survival. Yet here he was, not throwing punches, not celebrating victories, but sitting inside a vehicle surrounded by shattered glass, looking dazed, exposed, human. The first videos didn't come with explanations. They never do. They came with captions, speculation, fear. He doesn't look okay. Why isn't he standing? This is worse than they're saying. And then came the words that spread like wildfire. I will not survive. Did he say it? Did someone mishear something in the chaos? Did fear fill in the blanks before facts could arrive? No one knew. But millions believed something was terribly wrong. And that belief mattered. Because in the age of viral footage, perception moves faster than truth. And once fear takes hold, it doesn't wait for official statements. Let's slow this down. Let's go back. Because before the headlines, before the rumors, before the shock, there was just a drive. A convoy moving along a familiar route. A Lexus SUV. Security following behind. Men talking, thinking, planning the rest of their day. No one wakes up expecting their life to fracture before lunch. And yet, according to Nigerian road safety officials, the SUV was believed to be traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit. An overtaking maneuver was attempted. Control was lost. Ahead, a truck sat parked on the side of the road. Stationary, unmoving, unforgiving. The impact was sudden. Metal collapsed. Glass exploded. Momentum vanished. 2 people would lose their lives that morning. 5 men were involved in total. And Anthony Joshua was seated behind the driver, alongside another passenger, when everything changed. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because while officials would later say Joshua sustained minor injuries and was taken to hospital, the visuals told a different emotional story. A man shirtless in public. That alone felt wrong. A man known for control, posture, presence, suddenly stripped of all of it. Why was he shirtless? Was it medical? Was it shock? Was it simply the chaos of the moment? No one explained it at first. And the internet hates empty space. So it filled it. With fear. With assumptions. With worst-case scenarios. People froze the footage. Replayed it. Zoomed in. They analyzed his eyes. His posture. The way he sat. He looks out of it. That's not minor. Why is he so quiet? Silence became suspicious. And then there was the second video. Joshua sitting in the front seat of another vehicle, speaking to officials. Alive. Moving. But still not smiling. Still not himself. Was that shock? Was that pain? Was that something worse? Ask yourself this. If you saw one of the strongest athletes in the world looking like that, would you feel reassured? Or would your stomach drop? Because strength doesn't protect you from physics. Muscle doesn't negotiate with speed. Fame doesn't soften impact. And deep down, everyone knows it. That's why this moment hits so hard. Anthony Joshua represents more than boxing. He represents control, preparation, discipline, the idea that if you do everything right, you survive. And yet, here he was, caught in the same randomness that claims ordinary lives every day. 2 people didn't make it out. That fact matters. It grounds this story in reality. This wasn't a scare alone. It was a tragedy. Families somewhere received phone calls that would divide their lives into before and after. While the world focused on the famous survivor, others were beginning to mourn. And that contrast, that imbalance of attention, it added another layer of tension to everything that followed. Because now there were questions. Was speed the real culprit? Why was the truck parked there? Why does this road keep claiming lives? And why did the early footage feel so much worse than the official language? Minor injuries. Those two words became a problem, not because they were false, but because they didn't match what people thought they saw. And when reality and perception collide, distrust grows. Some said officials were downplaying it. Others said social media was exaggerating it. Most people didn't know what to believe. And in that confusion, fear found oxygen. The phrase, "I will not survive," continued to circulate. It appeared in captions, in whispered commentary, in dramatic retellings. But no verified source confirmed it. Still, it stuck, because it captured how the moment felt. Not just for him, but for everyone watching. That split second where you look at someone powerful and realize they are just as breakable as anyone else. And here's the thing most people missed in the first wave of reactions. Shock can make injuries look smaller than they are, and it can also make survivable injuries look catastrophic. Adrenaline lies. Silence misleads. And trauma doesn't announce itself clearly, especially not in the minutes after impact, which is why those early hours mattered so much. Joshua was taken to hospital, evaluated, monitored, but information came slowly, and every delay fed speculation. Fans imagined the worst. Critics argued over responsibility. Others turned the moment into content. And somewhere in all of this, a man was processing the fact that he had just come face to face with death. Not in a ring, not under lights, not with gloves on, but on an ordinary road, on an ordinary day, because of one decision made at speed. Ask yourself this. How do you mentally recover from that? How does someone whose entire career is built on confidence and physical dominance reconcile with sudden vulnerability? And how does a country already grieving two lost lives process the survival of someone so famous? These questions didn't have answers yet. Not in the first minutes. Not in the first hours. All anyone had were images, fragments, and feelings. And that's where this story truly begins. Not with conclusions. Not with certainty. But with confusion. With a sense that something was off. That the truth was layered. That what happened inside that SUV would take time to fully understand. Because crashes don't end when the vehicles stop moving. They echo. Through families. Through careers. Through public memory. And what happened next? Inside hospitals. Inside private conversations. And inside Anthony Joshua himself. Would quietly reshape everything people thought they knew about that day. But before we get there, we have to understand the road. Because the road always has a history. And the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway has stories that make this one feel disturbingly familiar. And once you hear them, this crash won't feel random anymore. It will feel inevitable. People don't call it dangerous out loud at first. They joke about it. They warn you casually. They tell you to be careful on that road, the way you'd remind someone to lock their door at night. But everyone who uses the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway knows the truth. This road does not forgive mistakes. And that's not exaggeration. That's experience. Ask truck drivers. Ask commuters. Ask emergency responders who have scraped bodies off its shoulders at dawn. Ask families who have waited for someone who never came home. This stretch of highway isn't just asphalt and paint. It's momentum, speed, human impatience colliding with physics. And on the morning Anthony Joshua's SUV entered it, the road was already hungry. Here's what most people outside Nigeria don't understand. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is not just a road. It's a lifeline. It connects one of Africa's largest cities to the rest of the Southwest. Millions rely on it every day. Commercial trucks, private convoys, buses packed beyond capacity. The traffic never really sleeps. And when traffic doesn't sleep, neither does risk. Overtaking becomes routine. Speed limits become suggestions. Parked trucks become invisible threats. Because when you drive the same road over and over again, familiarity breeds confidence. And confidence breeds shortcuts. This is where the danger begins. Drivers stop seeing the road as unpredictable. They think they've figured it out. I've driven this stretch 1,000 times. I know where to overtake. I know when to push. Until one time, they don't. That's why crash statistics on this highway spike the same way every year. Same causes, same patterns, same outcomes. Speed, overtaking, stationary vehicles. And almost always, someone says afterward, it happened so fast. On that morning, shortly after 11 a.m., the conditions were deceptively normal. Daylight, visibility, no storm to blame, no sudden darkness, which makes what happened even more unsettling. Because when nothing external goes wrong, we're forced to look inward. Decision-making, judgment, timing. The Lexus SUV carrying Anthony Joshua was not alone. A security vehicle followed behind. This wasn't reckless isolation. This was a coordinated movement. And yet, even convoys are vulnerable. Because convoys don't cancel physics. They don't shorten stopping distance. They don't soften impact. And when one vehicle miscalculates, everyone pays attention. Let's talk about parked trucks. On Nigerian highways, it's not uncommon to find heavy-duty trucks pulled over on shoulders or partially off the road. Mechanical issues, breakdowns, driver fatigue. Sometimes they're properly marked. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they blend into the background until it's too late. At high speed, a stationary object is the most dangerous thing you can encounter. It doesn't move with you. It doesn't adjust. It doesn't flinch. It waits. Authorities would later say the SUV is believed to have been traveling beyond the legally prescribed speed limit and lost control while making an overtaking maneuver. Those words sound clinical, but what they really describe is this: a moment of confidence, a gap that looked big enough, a calculation that felt right, until it wasn't. Ask yourself this: how many times have you overtaken another vehicle and felt that small rush? That split-second decision where you commit and hope everything lines up? Now multiply that by speed, by mass, by a vehicle built to protect, but not defy. SUVs give a false sense of security. They're higher, heavier. They feel planted. But when they lose control, they don't slide politely. They roll. They collapse. They transfer force brutally. When the Lexus struck the stationary truck, the energy had nowhere to go. So it went into metal, into glass, into bodies. The sound alone would have been enough to draw attention. Witnesses often describe these moments the same way: a loud bang, a pause, then movement, people running toward wreckage, not knowing what they'll find. And here's something that rarely gets discussed. In the first moments after a crash, no one knows who is alive. Not really. Even if someone is breathing, even if someone is sitting upright. Shock can mask injuries. Adrenaline can delay pain. That's why bystanders often panic even when victims seem okay. Because experience has taught them that appearances lie. When people reached the SUV, they didn't see Anthony Joshua the boxer. They saw a man disoriented, exposed, still, and that image alone carried weight. Imagine this. You're on a highway known for death. You hear a crash. You run toward it. And inside the wreckage is one of the most recognizable athletes in the world. That moment bends reality. Suddenly, the abstract danger of the road becomes personal. If it can do this to him, what chance does anyone else have? This is why footage spread so fast. Not just because of celebrity, but because it confirmed a fear many already had. That this road doesn't care who you are. The fact that 2 other people died in the collision deepened that fear. Because now it wasn't just about survival. It was about consequence. Someone paid the ultimate price. And while the world would later focus on injuries, recovery, and statements, those first minutes belonged to chaos. Shouting, phones recording, officials arriving. And somewhere in that chaos, someone noticed Anthony Joshua was shirtless. That detail stuck. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because clothing represents normalcy. And the absence of it suggested urgency. Medical intervention. Shock response. Confusion. No one stopped to explain. And so people filled the gap. He must be badly hurt. They wouldn't strip him like that for nothing. Truth is, in emergencies, protocol is messy. Medics cut clothes. Bystanders remove them. Heat and shock demand exposure. But logic doesn't travel as fast as fear. And the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway has taught people to expect the worst. Every crash, there has a backstory. Someone overtook. Someone sped. Someone trusted luck. That's why authorities were quick to mention speed and overtaking. Not to assign blame publicly, but because the pattern was familiar. And familiarity breeds resignation. Another crash. Another tragedy. Another reminder. But this time, the survivor was famous. And fame changes how stories unfold. Because when a celebrity is involved, silence becomes suspicious. Every hour without updates feels longer. Every vague statement feels intentional. And that's exactly what happened. Minor injuries. Those words felt inadequate, not because they were necessarily wrong, but because they didn't match the road's reputation. People expected worse. They expected sirens, statements, a longer hospital stay. And when that didn't immediately happen, anxiety grew. Ask yourself this. Would you trust a calm update if everything you've ever known about that road screamed danger? Would you believe that someone walked away easily from a collision that killed 2 others? Or would you assume the truth was being softened? This is the psychological trap. Context shapes belief. And the context here was brutal. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway had claimed too many lives for optimism to feel natural. This road doesn't do minor. It does headlines, funerals, unfinished journeys. And yet, Anthony Joshua was alive, talking, being moved, assessed, which created an uncomfortable contradiction. The road that never forgives had spared someone. Why? Luck? Position in the vehicle? Vehicle design? Pure randomness? Or was this story not finished yet? Because survival is not the end of trauma. An impact doesn't measure damage only in broken bones. Sometimes the most lasting injuries arrive quietly. Later, inside. And as emergency responders cleared the wreckage and traffic resumed, something else was already happening. The story was leaving the road. It was entering phones, timelines, group chats. And once it did, it stopped being just about an accident. It became about meaning, about mortality, about fame, about how close even the strongest come to disappearing. But before the world could debate outcomes, there was still one unanswered question. What exactly happened in the seconds before impact? Because that decision, that overtake, that loss of control, would soon become the center of everything. And when we examine it closely, it reveals a truth most people don't want to face. Sometimes, survival comes down to inches. And sometimes, inches decide who lives and who doesn't. But what happened next, in the moments just before metal met metal, would force everyone to confront how thin that margin really is. And no one saw it coming. One moment, the SUV is gliding along a familiar stretch of asphalt. The next, everything changes. A single decision transforms a routine drive into a life-altering event. Let's break it down. The SUV carrying Anthony Joshua wasn't just moving. It was moving fast. Faster than the law allows. Faster than safety allows. Speed isn't just a number. It's a multiplier. It turns small errors into catastrophes. It turns a slight miscalculation into irreversible damage. According to reports, the vehicle was attempting an overtaking maneuver. At first glance, that seems normal. We do it every day. Pull ahead. Accelerate. Merge. But think about the stakes. This wasn't a sedate suburban street. This was the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, a road notorious for sudden, unpredictable hazards. A road where trucks can appear from nowhere, where potholes can hide beneath speed, and where other drivers' impatience adds to chaos. Now picture this, an SUV, nearly 2 tons of steel, accelerating to overtake a vehicle. The driver gauges the gap, calculates the speed, hopes for a smooth pass, and then, almost imperceptibly, the vehicle begins to drift. Control slips. The wheels don't respond as expected. Momentum betrays intent. For anyone watching, these moments unfold in milliseconds. For those inside, time stretches. Every heartbeat feels like a drumbeat of warning. Every fraction of a second carries the weight of survival. Physics is merciless. The SUV, heavy and high, has a center of gravity that works against it at extreme speed. One wrong turn, one overcorrection, and the vehicle reacts violently. Tires skid, metal bends, glass shatters, and ahead, the stationary truck waits. Stationary doesn't mean harmless. Stationary means rigid, unyielding. A wall the SUV cannot absorb. Impact calculations don't wait for human intuition. Momentum transfers instantly. The SUV crumples. The truck barely budges. Passengers feel a violent jolt, as if the vehicle has become a weapon turned inward. Inside, chaos reigns. Anthony Joshua, seated behind the driver, is flung forward. Glass cuts, metal pinches, adrenaline spikes. Shock sets in. The human body is remarkable under trauma. It stiffens. It bends. It reacts before the mind catches up. But it cannot escape physics. And in these moments, survival is never guaranteed. Outside, bystanders react. Cars screech to a halt. People run. Phones come out. Voices rise and fall in panic. For those watching the footage later, it looks surreal. A man known for strength, calm, and control, shirtless, dazed, sitting amidst shattered glass. It defies expectations. It challenges belief. Inside the vehicle, every movement feels amplified. A tap against metal reverberates like a gunshot. Every inhale hurts. Every heartbeat seems louder than normal. Yet the vehicle remains upright enough for Joshua to be visible. Alive, conscious, breathing, which adds to the tension. Because survival doesn't erase danger. It doesn't erase shock. It doesn't erase the very real possibility that small injuries could escalate in ways unseen. Now consider the role of speed again. In a typical vehicle collision, slower speeds often mean minor injuries. Higher speeds, especially above the legal limit, exponentially increase risk. The same maneuver that would be harmless at 40 kilometers per hour can be fatal at 80 or 90. And the SUV's size complicates things further. Heavy vehicles absorb some impact, but the distribution of force inside is unpredictable. Seats may protect partially. Seatbelts save lives, but cannot prevent whiplash, contusions, or internal trauma. So while Anthony Joshua survived, the moment exposed the razor-thin margin between survival and disaster. Witnesses later described a surreal calm in the immediate aftermath. Not all chaos is loud. Sometimes, the stillness is the scariest part. It's the pause when everyone realizes the crash is over, and no one knows who will walk away. Inside the SUV, decisions continue, though no one consciously makes them. Should I move? Can I stand? Am I bleeding? Are others okay? Bystanders arrive, some trained, most not. Phones record. Voices shout instructions. Officials step in. And somewhere in that swirl, Joshua emerges from the initial shock, communicating when possible, but visibly impacted. Alive, but shaken. Meanwhile, the road itself waits. Cars continue to pass. Traffic adjusts. Life resumes as quickly as possible. Yet the split second of the crash leaves an imprint. It reshapes perceptions. It creates narratives. It triggers fear. Because humans are pattern seekers. When someone survives a high-speed collision on a notoriously dangerous road, we ask, why them? Luck? Skill? Fate? We want to dissect every element. Every choice, every miscalculation. And in doing so, we start to grasp just how fragile control really is. This is why the story doesn't end with the SUV coming to rest. Because the crash is only the beginning. The decisions before it, the speed, the overtaking maneuver, the confidence, the misjudgment, set the stage for everything that follows. And what follows is not just about physical injuries. It's about perception, panic, and the way a single split-second decision reverberates through lives, media, and national consciousness. Ask yourself this. If you had been in that vehicle, how would you have reacted? Would adrenaline have overridden pain? Would fear have paralyzed you? Would survival feel like victory or shock? Because that split second, measured in milliseconds, defines the difference between life and death, trauma and recovery, fear and rationality. And in Anthony Joshua's case, the split second also became the origin of global speculation. Footage circulated. Captions exaggerated. Rumors spread. Questions multiplied. Was it worse than reported? Did he really feel like he wouldn't survive? Were officials downplaying injuries? Could the road have taken more lives if circumstances were slightly different? All these questions converge on one terrifying truth. The margin between control and catastrophe is almost invisible. And anyone traveling that highway, famous or not, faces the same rules. But as the SUV moved from the scene, as Joshua was assessed by officials and prepared for hospital transport, another story began to emerge. Not of speed, not of physics, but of perception, fear, and the way people process trauma when the familiar becomes suddenly dangerous. And that story is just as critical as the crash itself. Because survival is not proof of invincibility. It is proof of proximity, of inches, of timing, of chance, and the question that hung over everything. What would have happened if was only beginning to be asked. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment of impact is never what you imagine. It isn't a slow-motion scene from a movie with sound effects timed perfectly. It's abrupt, abrasive, confusing, and for those inside, terrifyingly silent in its own way. The Lexus SUV carrying Anthony Joshua struck the stationary truck with a violence that no words can fully convey. Metal buckled. Glass exploded. The air filled with a sharp, biting sound of aluminum twisting against steel. But it wasn't loud enough to capture everything. Not really. Inside, every sense is overloaded. The eyes register fragments, shattered windshield, a distorted dashboard, a sudden intrusion of light where glass has broken. The ears catch only partial sounds, a muffled thud, the creak of twisting metal, the panicked inhale of someone else in the vehicle. The skin feels the abrupt jolt of force transferring through the seatbelt, the frame of the car. Shock, as it always does, takes over. Anthony Joshua, known for composure, is no exception. His body responds instinctively, stiffening, then collapsing, then adjusting again as the vehicle finally comes to rest. Adrenaline spikes, drowning pain, while cognition lags. The human mind can't process trauma that fast. Survival is a series of micro-decisions your body makes without asking permission. The silence that follows is almost deafening. Outside, there are no sirens yet. No flashing lights. Just the road. The vehicles that were moments ago moving with purpose are now halted. Tires screech. Engines hum nervously. People step out, stunned, unsure how to approach a crashed SUV that seems alive. The first person to reach the SUV is not an official. It is a passerby. Maybe a commuter, maybe someone running an errand. But in that moment, they become the first witness to an extraordinary scene. A man, a global sports icon, sitting shirtless amidst shattered glass and twisted metal, motionless for a heartbeat too long. Eyes widen. Phones are pulled out. Calls are made. And here is the unsettling truth. The strongest, most powerful figure in a sport built on domination suddenly looks small, vulnerable, human. For a split second, everyone watching, even those later seeing video footage, loses the sense of hierarchy. Fame and strength evaporate. What remains is survival in its rawest form. Inside, Joshua is conscious enough to register some reality. He is aware that the crash was not minor. The truck was massive. The speed was beyond the limit. The margins between life and death were microscopic. He feels the shock of realization. He could have died. This is where trauma begins to embed itself. It isn't only physical. It's emotional. It's cognitive. The fight-or-flight mechanism kicks in, but is constrained by injury and the awkward confines of a crumpled vehicle. Meanwhile, bystanders react differently. Some panic. Some run. Some try to help. Every movement seems amplified. Every gesture is critical. Every second matters. Anthony Joshua is not alone. Another passenger is present. Both men are thrown off balance by the violent deceleration. The driver, if conscious, is processing the mechanics of the crash even as his body lurches. The vehicle has stopped moving, but the human consequences are just beginning. The silence that replaces the impact is heavy. People expect screaming, crying, chaos, but instead, they see stillness. And that stillness terrifies more than sound ever could. Silence is the blank canvas where fear paints worst-case scenarios. Observers later describe their own internal dialogue. Is he dead? Are the others hurt worse? Did anyone else die? And for Anthony Joshua himself, the silence inside the SUV is a different kind of terror. The absence of external noise does not equal calm. His heartbeat pounds. His lungs work overtime. His mind races. He tries to assess injuries, his own and those of others, while piecing together how the seconds before impact could have led to this. Outside, the world begins to respond. Witnesses arrive. Some approach cautiously, unsure whether to intervene or wait for emergency services. Others rush to capture the moment on camera, their phones acting as both recorders and amplifiers of panic. Within this chaos, the first truth emerges. Survival does not immediately bring clarity. It brings questions. Why did the crash happen? Could it have been prevented? Was speed the real factor, or was it luck? These questions multiply as authorities arrive. Nigerian road safety officers begin to manage the scene. Traffic is diverted. Passers-by are instructed to step back. They observe, control, and report. But the microcosm inside the SUV remains raw, private, human. Anthony Joshua is eventually moved to the front seat of another vehicle to speak with officials. It is a brief transfer, but symbolically significant. It transforms him from someone trapped, passive, and potentially invisible into someone who can communicate. Alive, but still visibly affected. And here is the paradox that captures the attention of anyone watching. A man renowned for invincibility, a career built on defeating opponents in the ring, is suddenly in a position of vulnerability that no opponent, no glove, no championship could ever impose. The ring has rules. The highway does not. The SUV that struck the truck is now a scene frozen in time, but the story is not yet over. Trauma lingers. Adrenaline recedes. Shock fades. And the human brain begins to process what just happened, often in disjointed, fragmented ways. The moment of impact teaches lessons that are often invisible but profound. Survival is never guaranteed, regardless of strength or fame. Chance and timing are as decisive as skill or preparation. The road, indifferent to humans, is a silent arbiter of mortality. And while Anthony Joshua survived, others did not. 2 lives were claimed by that same split second. Their absence serves as a haunting counterpoint to his presence, a reminder of how fine the line between life and death can be. As cameras capture him sitting in the wrecked SUV, shirtless and dazed, the internet begins to react. Rumors spread. Misinterpretations arise. The phrase, "I will not survive," circulates widely, detached from verified reporting, but filled with emotional resonance. Why do these things catch hold? Because they align with what people instinctively fear. That even heroes are mortal, that chaos can strike anyone at any moment, and that survival is fragile, contingent, and, at times, inexplicable. And inside the vehicle, for Anthony Joshua, the experience is disorienting and isolating. The shock of the collision is compounded by the awareness that his life is suddenly public in a way it never was before. Fans, critics, and strangers are watching. Opinions form. The narrative is being written before the facts are fully known. This is why the silence after impact is so profound. It is both literal and symbolic. The vehicle has stopped moving, but the consequences are in motion. Emotional, social, and psychological reverberations radiate outward, touching not only those present, but millions who will witness the aftermath online. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, there is one constant. Anthony Joshua is alive, breathing, observing, processing. But survival is only the beginning. Because once the initial shock fades, reality sets in. Pain surfaces, confusion persists, questions multiply, and the public, hungry for answers, will speculate relentlessly. The impact did not just bend metal. It disrupted perceptions. It challenged assumptions about invincibility. It reframed the narrative of a global icon as suddenly human. And as emergency services continue to respond, as Joshua is assessed and transported, one thing becomes clear. The real aftermath has only begun. The silence, stillness, and shock of impact are not just physical. They are psychological. They are narrative. They are the space where stories are born, rumors take root, and fear spreads faster than facts. And what comes next, how the world reacts, how Joshua processes survival, and how those involved cope with trauma, will define this incident far more than the split-second collision itself. But what comes next, the first statements, the family reactions, the hospital moments, will reveal just how thin the line between life and death truly was. And no one, not even Joshua, saw the full story unfolding yet. 30 seconds, 40 frames per second, a few moments captured on a shaky smartphone camera. That's all it took to turn an already dramatic event into a global spectacle. The first footage from the crash appeared online within minutes. It didn't take long for viewers worldwide to freeze the frames, zoom in, and analyze every detail. Anthony Joshua was there, shirtless, seated in the twisted SUV, surrounded by shards of glass. His posture, his expression, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. He didn't shout, didn't wave for help, didn't smile reassuringly. He simply sat, dazed, human. And in those few seconds, the world collectively held its breath. The viral nature of the footage was not surprising. Social media is a machine designed for immediacy. In seconds, clips were shared, retweeted, and uploaded across platforms. Hashtags appeared. Speculation multiplied. Emotions ran high. Within an hour, millions had seen a man the world knew for strength, discipline, and dominance in a state that seemed fragile, almost ordinary. But why did this footage have such power? Why did it spread so quickly? Because it broke expectations. We are used to seeing athletes like Anthony Joshua in controlled environments. Rings, press conferences, gyms. Every movement calculated, every gesture projecting power. We are trained to associate him with invincibility, with discipline, with mastery over the body and mind. And suddenly, all of that disappeared. The image of Joshua shirtless, covered in dust and fragments of glass, seemed incongruent with everything we believed about him. Our brains struggled to reconcile the familiar icon with the unfamiliar reality. That cognitive dissonance fuels virality. It creates shock, curiosity, and the compulsion to share. The footage also gave rise to rumors. Some subtle, some extreme. Early captions suggested that his injuries were far worse than reported. Some claimed he had uttered the words, "I will not survive," though these were never verified. Yet once the phrase circulated, it became almost impossible to retract. The power of a single line, paired with an image, can outpace official statements, and that's exactly what happened. But there's another dimension to consider: human perception under trauma. For those on the scene, the footage captured only a fraction of reality. Shock, adrenaline, and confusion affect both witnesses and victims. Joshua may have been moving, speaking, or even assessing his own injuries at the moment the camera rolled, but that context was invisible to the casual viewer. The raw, fragmentary nature of video creates a vacuum, and humans instinctively fill it with narrative. That's why the same footage could make minor injuries look catastrophic. That's why millions of people around the world reacted with fear, outrage, or disbelief. That's why the footage itself became almost more important than any official report. The psychological impact of viral footage cannot be overstated. Once the images exist online, they take on a life of their own. They circulate independently of the facts. They shape opinion, create panic, and demand attention. And when a figure like Anthony Joshua is involved, the stakes are magnified. Every frame was dissected. People noticed the shards of glass on the seat. They commented on the blood, minor or not. It looked alarming. They focused on Joshua's gaze, interpreting it in countless ways: stunned, fearful, confused, in pain. Our minds instinctively try to create a story from visual cues, especially when those cues involve someone we think we know. And then there was the second video, which added a layer of complexity. Joshua, now in the front seat of another vehicle, was speaking to officials. His movements were deliberate, controlled. His breathing steady enough to suggest that he was physically conscious, medically responsive. Yet the previous footage had already made an impression. This contrast created tension. It generated questions. Was he recovering quickly? Was he masking pain? Or had the first images created a perception that reality could not match? Humans are pattern seekers. We try to reconcile conflicting data. When presented with a split narrative, the first shocking footage and the second, more composed video, our brains oscillate between fear and reassurance, uncertainty and relief. That oscillation drives engagement. People click, comment, and share. They seek resolution that rarely comes immediately. And while the footage went viral, it also forced a larger conversation about perception, celebrity, and mortality. How do we react when someone we see as indestructible is suddenly vulnerable? Why does our empathy spike when fame collides with human fragility? How much do we project our fears onto those we admire? These are questions without easy answers, but they explain why the footage changed everything. It didn't just capture an accident. It reframed an entire narrative. It shifted focus from traffic safety statistics to human vulnerability. It blurred the line between public interest and private trauma. In addition, the footage intensified speculation about the crash itself. People debated speed. They questioned the presence of the stationary truck. They analyzed the overtaking maneuver in slow motion, pointing out hypothetical alternatives that might have prevented the collision. Even armchair experts weighed in on vehicle physics, seatbelt efficacy, and injury potential. Meanwhile, Anthony Joshua was living it in real time. He had survived a high-speed impact. He had seen metal bend around him, glass shatter, and 2 people lose their lives. He was confronted with immediate questions. How badly hurt am I? Are others okay? Will the world see me as damaged, vulnerable, or weak? For a public figure whose entire career is constructed around power, resilience, and dominance, these are profoundly destabilizing concerns. The viral footage also forced authorities to respond. Nigerian road safety officials, aware of the public attention, issued statements about minor injuries and official assessments. But the timing of their response could not compete with the immediacy of social media. Once images exist online, statements lag, and public perception solidifies in the gap between footage and fact. There is also a lesson here about the nature of digital memory. The footage is permanent. It will be reshared, archived, analyzed, and referenced in perpetuity. Future discussions of the crash will almost certainly reference these frames, regardless of subsequent clarifications. In this way, the footage becomes part of a living, evolving narrative that transcends the physical event itself. And yet, for all its viral power, the footage reveals only a fraction of the truth. It cannot show the internal trauma. It cannot reveal the conversations happening in hospital rooms or between family members. It cannot capture the mental calculus Joshua undertook as adrenaline and shock began to wane. That is why viral footage, while compelling, is simultaneously misleading. It delivers emotion without full context. It provokes speculation without certainty. It compresses complexity into digestible, shareable moments, which is both its power and its danger. And the footage, combined with the rumors and the phrase, "I will not survive," created a global phenomenon. Millions of people felt they were witnessing a turning point in a life story, even though the full story had not yet been revealed. In this way, the crash became more than an accident. It became a case study in perception, trauma, and digital culture. It became a story of how humanity reacts to vulnerability in unexpected places, and how quickly the narrative can outpace the facts. But the most critical detail is this: while millions debated, analyzed, and speculated, Anthony Joshua was still processing survival. Physically, he was being assessed. Mentally, he was confronting fear, shock, and uncertainty. And socially, he was now part of a global narrative being constructed in real time. This is where the true power of viral footage lies. It transforms the personal into the public, the private into the spectacle, and the momentary into the enduring. And as the world continued to share, comment, and speculate, one question lingered. What really happened inside that SUV? Because footage can tell you what it looks like. It can hint at what might be felt. But it cannot tell you the full human story. And what came next? The hospital assessments, the family reactions, the unfolding narrative of recovery would reveal just how layered, complicated, and fragile survival truly is. But no one knew that yet. It is easy to focus on the famous face in a wrecked SUV, to watch the videos, to dissect the body language of a man known worldwide for his power. It is human nature to center the narrative on someone we recognize, someone whose story we think we know. But in doing so, there is a danger. We forget the people who didn't survive. 2 lives were lost that morning on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Names, faces, and stories may not have circulated as widely as Joshua's, but their absence is no less tragic. Their deaths are permanent, irreplaceable, and leave ripples that extend far beyond the immediate scene. Families shattered. Communities mourning. Futures abruptly ended. In the chaos of viral footage, tweets, and global speculation, the focus shifted to survival, to celebrity, to speculation over injuries. Yet, at the scene, the human cost was stark and immediate. Emergency responders worked against the clock. Bystanders tried to assist. And somewhere in the midst of it all, grieving relatives began the long, silent process of realizing that their loved ones would not return. Imagine the family waiting for a call, a text, a sign of life. The minutes stretch into hours. Anxiety builds. Rumors fly. Finally, confirmation arrives. They are gone. The suddenness is incomprehensible. Death has a way of defying logic, arriving at the worst possible moment, stripping ordinary people of ordinary futures. The lives lost were not just statistics. They were individuals with families, friends, and aspirations. They might have been returning from work, heading to an appointment, or traveling for reasons as mundane as they were essential. The highway does not discriminate. All are equally vulnerable when circumstances align in the wrong way. For every viral clip, every caption speculating on the famous survivor, there were two families grappling with absence. Two lives that would not be celebrated, analyzed, or scrutinized online. They were present in reports, sometimes reduced to a line in a statement. Two fatalities occurred. That line, however, cannot convey the depth of grief, the shock of sudden loss, or the crushing weight of unanswered questions. The psychological impact of witnessing a loved one die in a crash is profound. Survivors often experience guilt, asking why they lived while someone else did not. Friends, co-workers, and strangers may blame themselves, replaying the events in their minds in endless loops of what if. The trauma extends far beyond the immediate moment of death. It shapes lives, decisions, and perceptions for years. And yet, the story of Joshua's survival complicates the narrative. People naturally gravitate toward the dramatic image of a public figure recovering, but that lens can obscure the profound tragedy experienced by others. The attention on a single person, no matter how compelling, cannot erase the lives that ended in the same incident. It is also worth considering the ethical dimension of public storytelling. When tragedies involve both celebrity and ordinary individuals, media and social media often prioritize visibility over comprehensiveness. The camera follows the famous, the news follows the popular, the tweets follow the shocking images. Meanwhile, the absent voices, the deceased, fade into anonymity. And yet, they deserve recognition. They are part of the story just as much as the survivor. Their deaths provide context to the chaos. They remind us that high-speed collisions carry consequences beyond the viral clip, beyond the public fascination. Death, in this case, is permanent, unalterable, and deeply human. In practical terms, the presence of fatalities adds complexity to the aftermath. Emergency response teams must prioritize care for multiple victims. Traffic management becomes critical. Investigations into speed, vehicle condition, and roadway safety must account for both the survivors and the deceased. Every decision made during rescue operations carries life or death consequences. For Anthony Joshua, witnessing or learning later about the fatalities introduces another layer of psychological burden. Survival guilt is common among those who live when others do not, even in situations beyond personal control. Athletes, accustomed to resilience and performance under pressure, are not immune to this human response. Emotional processing may be delayed, conflicted, or intense. For the public, understanding the full human impact requires empathy, not voyeurism. The two fatalities were not merely background details. They were central to the event's reality. Their absence punctuates the chaotic footage, reminds viewers of stakes beyond celebrity, and humanizes an incident that could otherwise be reduced to spectacle. This is why comprehensive storytelling matters. In narratives like this, it is insufficient to focus solely on viral images or celebrity survival. Ethical reporting and nuanced engagement must acknowledge those who cannot speak, whose lives ended suddenly and tragically. They provide the moral and emotional gravity necessary to comprehend the event fully. The deaths also amplify the urgency of broader questions: roadway safety, vehicle regulation, and driver behavior. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway has a known history of fatal collisions. Every new incident raises concerns about enforcement, infrastructure, and public awareness. Each life lost is a reminder that safety is not abstract. It is tangible, immediate, and critical. As the world consumed images of Joshua's survival, these two fatalities underscore the precariousness of life in such conditions. Fame may draw attention, but it does not confer immunity. Their loss remains permanent, a silent counterpoint to the drama and attention focused elsewhere. And for the families, the contrast is excruciating. While the world watches a celebrity navigate recovery and speculation, their own grief remains private, unshared, and unrecognized by millions. That tension, public spectacle versus private tragedy, is part of what makes incidents like this both compelling and morally complex. It is in this context that we must consider the psychological and emotional landscape of the crash. For every video viewed, every comment made, and every discussion shared online, there exists a quieter, more painful reality. Two people did not survive. Their absence echoes in ways that images alone cannot capture. And yet, the narrative moves forward. The survivor, Anthony Joshua, is assessed by medical professionals, transported to a hospital, and begins the process of recovery. His story dominates the headlines, the videos, the social media feeds. But the fatalities, though less visible, remain central to understanding the full scope of what occurred. This duality, celebrity survival and ordinary loss, creates a tension that drives public fascination. It is both emotional and cognitive. We are drawn to triumph and resilience, yet the shadow of mortality reminds us that outcomes are fragile, contingent, and sometimes arbitrary. By acknowledging the two lives lost, we restore balance to the story. We confront the human cost that cannot be ignored. We recognize that even in the midst of viral footage, speculation, and public scrutiny, there are realities that demand solemn reflection. And as the scene clears, as officials begin their investigations and the SUV is moved, the presence of absence lingers. It is invisible to most observers, but undeniable to those closest to the victims, to the emergency responders, and to the survivor himself. The world will move on. Social media will share other clips, news cycles will shift, and attention will pivot to recovery, statements, and celebrity. But the lives lost will remain irretrievable. Their stories may never be fully told, yet their impact resonates in every discussion of the crash, in every analysis of safety, and in every reflection on human vulnerability. The question then becomes unavoidable. How does one process survival alongside death? How does Anthony Joshua reconcile being alive when others were not? How do the families live with the suddenness of loss? How does society ensure these deaths are not forgotten amid spectacle and virality? These are questions without easy answers, but they are central to the story, because survival is not heroic in isolation. It exists in relation to loss. It is defined not just by escape, but by context. And what comes next, the assessment of injuries, the reporting of minor injuries, the spread of viral speculation, will continue to shape perception, emotion, and narrative. But before the world could fully grasp the human cost, attention shifted back to the man who survived. And that shift would define the next stage of the story, where perception, fame, and reality collide. When authorities announced that Anthony Joshua had sustained minor injuries and was taken to the hospital, the words sounded reassuring on the surface. A global icon had survived a high-speed crash that killed two people. That alone seemed miraculous. And yet, the phrase minor injuries quickly sparked debate, skepticism, and confusion. Because what does minor actually mean in the context of a high-velocity collision? Medical professionals understand that the term is relative. A superficial cut, a bruised rib, or minor lacerations can be categorized as minor in official reports. But those same injuries can feel anything but minor to the person experiencing them. Pain perception varies. Shock can mask internal trauma, and adrenaline often delays the onset of symptoms. What is minor externally may still be deeply impactful internally. For Anthony Joshua, the public announcement did not necessarily equate to relief. The world was watching. Headlines were scrutinizing his every movement. Videos circulated endlessly. The weight of perception added a psychological layer to physical trauma. Even if his injuries were not life-threatening, they were significant in ways beyond immediate medical assessment. Let's break down what happens physiologically in the aftermath of a crash. When the body experiences a sudden deceleration, as in a collision at high speed, several things occur simultaneously. The skeletal system absorbs shock, often resulting in contusions, fractures, or sprains. Internal organs are jolted, which can cause bruising or micro-tears that are not immediately visible. Muscles contract violently, sometimes leading to strains or lingering soreness. The nervous system enters hyperarousal, creating a sensation of heightened awareness but also masking pain. All of this occurs within seconds, and even the fittest individuals, athletes included, cannot fully mitigate these effects. For someone like Joshua, whose career depends on peak physical performance, these injuries may be categorized as minor medically, but their impact on career, training, and psychological state can be substantial. Public perception, however, rarely accounts for nuance. Social media users interpreted minor injuries as evidence that Joshua was unscathed, yet the footage told a different story. The disorientation, the shirtless appearance, the dazed posture, all visual cues suggested a severity beyond the official language. That tension between observation and statement is what drives virality and speculation. Psychologically, the discrepancy between public messaging and visual evidence can be destabilizing. Fans, critics, and casual viewers struggle to reconcile conflicting information. Some doubt official reports. Others question the credibility of the footage. Anxiety and curiosity escalate, prompting endless debate about the actual extent of Joshua's condition. Internally, Joshua was likely grappling with a dual reality: the physical trauma itself and the awareness that millions were scrutinizing his every movement. The adrenaline that initially masked pain was waning. Subtle injuries, previously imperceptible, began to register. Internal bruising, minor concussions, and soft tissue injuries often reveal themselves hours or even days after impact. The hospital assessment, while critical for immediate care, is only part of the story. Medical personnel would conduct imaging, monitor vital signs, and evaluate musculoskeletal injuries. But even in the best circumstances, some symptoms remain invisible in the early stages. Head trauma, psychological shock, and internal bruising can manifest later, complicating recovery and affecting performance in the ring. Beyond the physical, there is also the mental and emotional aspect of trauma. High-profile survivors often experience acute stress, which can manifest as sleep disturbances, anxiety, hypervigilance, and post-traumatic stress symptoms. The sudden, violent nature of the crash, combined with media scrutiny, creates a perfect storm for psychological strain. This raises a critical question. When a celebrity announces minor injuries, what is the true cost? Physically, it may be manageable. Publicly, it reassures. Psychologically, it complicates. For Joshua, the world expects resilience, composure, and immediate recovery. Yet survival does not erase vulnerability. Even minor injuries can feel major when compounded by trauma, fear, and the weight of global attention. There's also an ironic twist here. The very term, minor injuries, can magnify perception. By downplaying severity, official statements inadvertently create a narrative tension. The public sees a dazed, disoriented man in viral footage but hears that he is fine. That contradiction fuels debate, speculation, and anxiety, and keeps the story alive in ways that simple truth often cannot. Consider this. If Joshua had emerged from the wreckage with visible, severe injuries, the world would have immediately adjusted its expectations. Sympathy and concern would dominate. The narrative would be straightforward. But the ambiguity introduced by the term minor creates curiosity and tension. People want to know, what does minor really mean? Is he in pain? Could there be hidden complications? For the survivor, this is a double burden. You are not only recovering from trauma, but also navigating public scrutiny. Every movement, every word, every social media post is interpreted, analyzed, and sometimes criticized. Even subtle signs of discomfort can be magnified into controversy or speculation. And this is compounded by timing. The first 24 to 48 hours after a high-speed collision are critical. Adrenaline masks pain, injuries may be hidden, and emotional processing is just beginning. Official statements issued during this window are necessarily cautious and generalized, but the public interprets them as definitive. The gap between medical accuracy and public perception is a source of tension, both for survivors and for audiences. For Joshua, being a professional athlete adds layers of complexity. Performance expectations, sponsorship obligations, training schedules, all depend on physical health. A minor injury may still disrupt weeks or months of preparation. Even the smallest internal bruising or muscle strain can compromise performance in ways that are not immediately visible but have long-term consequences. Furthermore, The incident raises questions about recovery protocols for high-profile figures. How much time is needed before returning to normal activity? How are medical updates communicated to the public without compromising privacy? And how does one balance transparency with protection against misinformation? The answer is never simple. High-profile survivors live in a paradoxical space. Their experiences are public, yet intimate. Their trauma is visible, yet misunderstood. Their recovery is anticipated, yet unpredictable. And so the narrative continues. While official statements suggest minor injuries, the visual evidence, public speculation, and human psychology combine to create a complex story. The term minor cannot capture the full spectrum of physical and emotional realities, nor the profound impact of surviving a crash that claimed 2 lives. Ask yourself this. If you were in his shoes, would you consider yourself uninjured if every step, every breath, every movement reminded you of what nearly happened? Would you feel whole when 2 others did not survive? Would minor injuries feel like enough to describe the trauma endured, both physically and mentally? The answer is not simple, and it is not comforting. But it sets the stage for what comes next, the family's response, the personal processing of survival, and the way the world reacts to vulnerability in someone so universally seen as invincible. Because surviving is not the end of the story. It is merely the threshold. And what comes next, the private moments, the familial concern, the media storm, will show just how complicated recovery truly is. For Anthony Joshua, family has always been a cornerstone of strength. His father, Robert Joshua, his mother, Yetta Odesanya, and his brother, Jacob Joshua, were constants throughout his life and career. But that morning on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, family became something entirely different. It became a source of fear, anxiety, and helplessness. Imagine being on the other side of the world, receiving news that your loved one was involved in a high-speed crash. The details are scarce. Reports are conflicting. Social media is alive with speculation. Every notification on your phone could bring either relief or devastation. This is precisely the emotional state of Joshua's family in the hours following the collision. For them, there was no viral footage, no viral commentary, just raw concern and uncertainty. They did not yet know that Joshua had survived, nor did they fully comprehend the extent of the injuries, minor as they may have been. All they had were fragmented reports, rumors, and the gnawing fear that the worst had happened. The psychological impact of that uncertainty cannot be overstated. Family members often experience what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety, a constant state of hypervigilance, imagining scenarios ranging from minor injury to fatality. For Joshua's parents, each passing minute without confirmation felt like a lifetime.